February 23, 1945, dawned over Iwo Jima, and the black volcanic sands glistened under the early sun. The island was a fortress. Reinforced concrete pillboxes dotted the landscape, carefully camouflaged and deadly. From the shore to the ridges, an entire Marine company found themselves pinned down, their progress halted by walls of steel and stone. Sherman tanks rumbled forward, but their armor could not breach the Japanese defenses. Flamethrower tanks tried to get close, but the angles, the obstacles, the enemy fire, everything made the approach impossible. The Marines were trapped, stretched across sand that was more of a battlefield than a path. Every step forward meant facing concentrated gunfire, and every bunker meant certain death. 5 of the 6 men in the demolition team were already dead or wounded, their mission unfinished, their courage a testament to the cost of every inch gained. Smoke from distant explosions drifted across the sands, and in that haze, the enormity of the challenge became painfully clear. The men clutched their rifles, eyes scanning the horizon, hearts pounding, knowing that a single misstep could end their lives. The Japanese had fortified every inch, anticipating the American advance, and their sights were deadly accurate. In the midst of the chaos, survival seemed measured not in hours, but in minutes. The company could not move, the tanks could not break through, and the flamethrowers could not reach the target. Every strategy had failed, every plan stalled. The tension was suffocating, the danger omnipresent, and the Marines faced a moment that would demand not just bravery, but something extraordinary. Across the black sands, the shadows of pillboxes loomed like silent predators, daring any man to try. It was in this impossible situation, under the unrelenting gaze of enemy guns, that one man's courage would become the story of the day. Amid the gunfire and exploding shells, every Marine could feel the weight of fear pressing down, yet they kept moving in small, cautious bursts. Each bunker seemed designed to snuff out hope, with machine guns covering every approach, overlapping fields of fire creating deadly triangles where no man could stand without being hit. Trenches and foxholes offered little cover, and the volcanic ash made every footprint visible, every movement a signal to the enemy. The roar of artillery blended with the sharp cracks of rifle fire, creating a deafening chaos where orders and voices struggled to be heard. The Marines relied on signals, nods, and desperate gestures as they tried to coordinate a path forward, but every inch of progress was paid for with lives. Observers later noted that the Japanese defenders had perfected a system of defense that forced the Americans into predictable patterns, making even the bravest hesitate. In the midst of that calculated killing ground, the men of the company were not just soldiers, they were humans, facing the rawest form of fear and courage. Each glance across the battlefield reminded them of the friends already lost and of the impossible odds that seemed to grow with every minute. The black sands were no longer just terrain, they were a crucible, testing resolve, ingenuity, and the willingness to confront death itself. In that moment, a sense of inevitability hung in the air, as if the island itself demanded a hero. And somewhere among them, a man who had once been deemed too short for the Marines was about to step forward, carrying not just fuel, but the hope of breaking through a fortress that had already claimed so many lives.
The man about to step forward was Corporal Hershel "Herky" Williams, 5'6", once rejected by the Marines for being too short. On the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, his height meant nothing. What mattered now was courage, determination, and an unshakable willingness to face what most men would run from. Hershel had grown up in a small town, far removed from war, and yet the call to serve had brought him here, to one of the deadliest islands in the Pacific. Rejection had only strengthened his resolve. The Marines who had once turned him away could not imagine that this undersized man would soon perform feats of bravery that would echo through history. Every detail mattered as he prepared for his mission. Strapping 70 pounds of pressurized flamethrower fuel to his back, he felt the weight not just physically, but morally, carrying the lives of his fellow Marines with him. Each tank held only 7 seconds of flame, each second a precious window to destroy the fortified bunkers and clear a path forward. The stakes were clear: advance and live, hesitate and die. 4 riflemen were assigned to cover him, their eyes scanning the black sands for Japanese snipers and machine gunners. Every movement had to be calculated, every step deliberate. Flamethrower operators were prime targets, and the Japanese defenders knew it. On Iwo Jima, those who wielded flame were marked for death. Even now, as explosions shook the ground and smoke filled the air, Hershel's mind focused on one thing at a time: the first pillbox, the first target, the first step forward. He had watched his comrades fall, seeing the destruction wrought by the enemy's fortified positions, and yet fear did not paralyze him. Instead, it sharpened his focus, heightening every sense. The heat of the sun on his back, the weight of the fuel, the roar of distant artillery, they were all part of the crucible he had chosen to enter. Every Marine on the beach held their breath as Hershel adjusted the nozzle, checked the pressure gauges, and moved toward the first bunker. His heart pounded in rhythm with the pounding of shells around him. Memories of his hometown, of simpler days, flashed briefly and were gone, replaced by the raw immediacy of survival and duty. The 4 men covering him were steady, their rifles trained on every shadow, every movement, every threat. Coordination was vital. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and the mission, and perhaps their lives, would be lost. The black volcanic sand crunched beneath his boots, marking each step like a countdown, each footfall bringing him closer to the deadly fortifications. Hershel knew that courage alone would not suffice. He had to move intelligently, predict the enemy's reactions, and exploit every vulnerability. He had trained for this, studied the bunkers, understood the angles, and yet nothing could fully prepare him for what lay ahead. The Japanese were experienced, disciplined, and merciless. They would not yield. The flamethrower on his back was both his weapon and his burden. Every second of flame counted. Every decision had immediate consequences. Across the battlefield, the tension was palpable. The Marines held their positions, hearts racing, eyes fixed on the man carrying hope and fire. Every instinct, every muscle, every ounce of willpower mattered as Hershel moved, knowing that the fate of his company, and perhaps the mission itself, rested on his shoulders. In that moment, Hershel Williams was not just a corporal or a soldier, he was the fulcrum on which the company's survival would turn. And with the first step forward, he embraced the impossible, ready to face a fortress with nothing but flame and courage. The first pillbox loomed ahead, a dark rectangle of reinforced concrete, bristling with machine guns and the promise of death. Hershel Williams advanced carefully, every step deliberate, his flamethrower ready, the pressurized fuel heavy on his back. Around him, the black volcanic sand stretched like a battlefield of shadows, every ridge and crater a potential trap. The roar of artillery shook the ground beneath his boots, the cracks of rifles cutting through the air. 4 Marines provided cover, their eyes scanning every angle, their rifles trained on the enemy who waited in silent calculation. Time moved differently on this island. Seconds stretched into eternities, and every movement carried consequences that could not be undone. Hershel approached the first bunker, its thick walls offering near impenetrable protection for the Japanese soldiers inside. They were trained to fire on flamethrower operators first, and yet he pressed forward, the nozzle of his weapon raised, ready to release 7 seconds of liquid fire. He knew that hesitation could be fatal. One wrong move, and he could be cut down before his weapon even discharged. He remembered his training, the countless hours practicing in mock bunkers, and the advice of his instructors. Every detail mattered: distance, angle, timing. The flamethrower hissed as fuel surged through the hose, ready to ignite. With a deep breath, he unleashed the first blast. The bunker erupted in flame and smoke. The Japanese defenders inside scrambled, the roar of fire filling the small concrete chamber, their positions compromised. Hershel moved on immediately, knowing that lingering even a second could draw enemy fire from adjacent positions. The black sand kicked up around him with each step, obscuring his movement, masking him from some of the enemy's eyes, yet amplifying the heat of explosions nearby. Each bunker was different. Some had hidden firing ports, others reinforced layers that made the fire creep and crawl before consuming the inside. Hershel adapted with each strike, adjusting nozzle angles, moving from cover to cover, letting the flamethrower do what tanks and artillery could not. The 4 riflemen covering him provided a protective rhythm of fire, suppressing Japanese gunners while he closed the distance to the next pillbox. Mortars fell around them, sending clouds of ash and dust into the air, and yet Hershel pressed on. Every pulse of flame was measured, precise, each 7-second burst a calculated strike designed to neutralize the enemy without wasting fuel. With every bunker destroyed, the Marines gained inches of ground that had been impossible just moments before. The Japanese fought back fiercely, machine guns chattering, rifles cracking, grenades rolling toward the advancing Marines, but Hershel's momentum never wavered. Courage was only part of the equation. Discipline, timing, and split-second decision-making kept him alive. By the 3rd and 4th pillboxes, fatigue weighed heavily on him. The heat of the flamethrower, the weight of the fuel, and the relentless roar of battle pressed down, but there was no time to falter. His mind focused only on the next target, the next step, the next 7 seconds that could save his comrades' lives. Smoke, flame, and the smell of burning bunkers filled the air, creating a surreal battlefield where sound and vision were distorted. Yet in that chaos, Hershel's determination shone clearly. He moved like a single instrument of destruction, precise, fearless, and relentless. As the 5th bunker fell, the Marines began to advance behind him, inspired by the destruction of what had seemed impenetrable. Each bunker neutralized revealed the human cost: the charred earth, the spent ammunition, the empty foxholes, and the courage of those who had fallen to hold the line. Hershel's bravery had turned a deadly stalemate into opportunity. Every bunker he neutralized opened a path through the hellish landscape of Iwo Jima, inch by inch, concrete by concrete. The Japanese defenders adapted, repositioning, firing from unexpected angles, yet Hershel anticipated their moves. Each step forward was a calculated risk, each blast of flame a gamble with survival, and with every flicker of fire he carved a path through what had once seemed unconquerable, proving that courage, skill, and unyielding resolve could overcome even the deadliest of fortresses.
By the time Hershel reached the 6th pillbox, the air was thick with smoke, heat, and the acrid scent of burned earth. Each bunker he had destroyed had opened a narrow path through what had seemed an impenetrable fortress, but the danger had only grown. The Japanese defenders were relentless, adapting their positions, firing from hidden ports, and lobbing grenades into the black sands where the Marines advanced. Hershel's fuel tanks were nearly empty, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders, but retreat was not an option. He had seen what failure meant, had watched his comrades fall, and he knew that the lives of those around him now rested on every step he took. Every movement was deliberate, every second measured, and every blast of flame could mean the difference between survival and death. The 6th bunker was particularly formidable, reinforced with multiple layers of concrete and steel, its firing ports positioned to cover every approach.
Hershel paused for a moment, assessing the angles, calculating the risks, and taking a deep, steadying breath. He could feel the eyes of his fellow Marines on him, the weight of their hope as tangible as the flamethrower strapped to his back. A misstep could cost them all, but he pressed forward, moving with a combination of precision, courage, and relentless determination. The hiss of the flamethrower filled the tense silence, followed by a roar of flame that erupted from the nozzle. The concrete walls seemed to shiver under the heat as fire consumed the interior, sending smoke and sparks into the sky. Smoke and debris obscured his vision, yet Hershel pressed on to the seventh and final pillbox. The ground was littered with spent ammunition, shattered wood, and the remnants of previous firefights. Every step was calculated, every motion critical, as machine guns snapped and rifles cracked in the distance. He used the 7 seconds of flame per tank with surgical precision, aiming for firing ports and vulnerable openings, maximizing damage with minimal exposure. He moved like a force of nature, each bunker falling under his relentless assault. Each successive blast was punctuated by the screams of the enemy, the roar of fire, and the crashing of reinforced walls giving way. The rhythm of his advance became almost hypnotic, each action a perfect balance of courage and technique. The final blast ignited the seventh bunker, a massive column of smoke and fire rising, signaling the collapse of what had once seemed insurmountable. The Marines behind him advanced, cautiously but with renewed confidence, emboldened by Hershel's actions. His courage had turned a deadly stalemate into a breakthrough, opening a path through Iwo Jima's hellish landscape. Exhausted, covered in ash and soot, Hershel paused, scanning the battlefield. Around him, the cries of comrades, the rattle of gunfire, and the roar of artillery continued, yet a sense of accomplishment hung in the air. Each bunker he destroyed had saved lives, cleared the way, and struck a devastating blow to the enemy's morale. The impossible mission had been completed through bravery, skill, and unwavering resolve. In that moment, the man once considered too short to serve had become a legend, proving that determination, courage, and precision could overcome even the deadliest defenses. The battlefield had shifted, the Marines could advance, and the story of a single man's heroism would echo for generations. His actions that day would later earn the Medal of Honor, but in that moment there was no ceremony, no medals, only survival, the roar of the battlefield, and the knowledge that one man's courage could change the course of a fight.
The battlefield fell into a tense, uneasy quiet after the destruction of the final pillbox. Smoke still curled into the sky, the acrid scent of fire and gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. The Marines cautiously moved forward, advancing over the black volcanic sands that had held them captive for hours. Hershel Williams, exhausted, his uniform scorched and soaked with sweat, felt the weight of both his fuel tank and the responsibility he had carried. Every step had been a choice between life and death, and yet he had pressed on, inch by inch, bunker by bunker, through what had seemed impossible. Around him, the men who had watched his courage unfold began to grasp the scale of what had been accomplished. For the first time that day, progress felt possible. The pillboxes that had pinned the company to the sands were now destroyed, their deadly fire silenced. Marines who had been frozen with fear now moved with renewed determination, inspired by the bravery of the corporal who had risked everything to give them a chance to advance. Hershel's actions had not only broken through concrete and steel, but had shattered the illusion that the island was unbeatable. He had turned a desperate, stalled assault into a path toward victory. In the immediate aftermath, Hershel moved from bunker to bunker, checking on his fellow Marines, providing assistance where he could. He was not concerned with praise or recognition. Survival and the lives of his comrades mattered more than medals or honor. Yet the men around him recognized the extraordinary nature of what they had witnessed.
Each story they told, each report filed, carried the weight of a single man's heroism that had changed the outcome of that brutal day. His courage became a beacon, a reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, an individual could make the impossible possible. Word of his actions spread quickly through the ranks, and his fellow Marines spoke of him in awe. The Medal of Honor would come later, a formal acknowledgement of deeds that had already reshaped the battle, but for Hershel and those who fought beside him, the real reward was the lives saved and the mission accomplished. The memory of that day, of the 7-second bursts of flame, the collapsing bunkers, and the relentless courage it took to advance under withering fire, would stay with him and with those who survived forever. Even decades later, the story of Hershel Williams remains a testament to human bravery, ingenuity, and resilience. A man once considered too small for the Marines had proven that courage was not measured in height or size, but in heart and determination. He had faced overwhelming odds, concrete fortifications, and a disciplined enemy, and yet he had pressed forward, leaving an indelible mark in history. His heroism became part of the larger story of Iwo Jima, a symbol of the sacrifices and extraordinary deeds of those who fought on that black volcanic island. Hershel's legacy lives on not just in medals or ceremonies, but in the lessons his actions teach about courage, leadership, and the profound impact one person can have in the face of impossible odds. The black sands of Iwo Jima, once a place of fear and stalemate, became a stage where bravery could change the course of battle. And in that story, the name Hershel Williams will forever be remembered as a man who carried not just fuel, but hope, fire, and the lives of his fellow Marines on his back, and in doing so, became a legend.